it's Wes, and today we're taking a look at something enormous. Let me show you the box it came in. This, the Orico CyberVault. More specifically, the CF1000. We've looked at NASs in the past. Most of the NASs we've looked at were smaller 4-bay models. This one is honestly compact for what it does. This is a 10-bay hard disk plus 2-bay M.2 AI-powered NAS. And it is called the CyberVault series, and oh boy does it live up to its name. But does it live up to the promise of performance and AI-ness? Let's take a deeper look. We'll break it down, we'll have a look on the inside, outside, upside down, and find out if this is worth your money. Starting with the feature set. I've already mentioned the basics. Let's take off the front fascia so that we can turn it on its front and have a look at the back I/O, because that's where things really start being crazy right from the get-go. We have two USB 4.0 ports, very powerful. We have a USB 3.2 port and another one, but in a variation. We have standard USB 2.0 ports. Why would we just have 2.0 ports? Those are sort of a peripheral thing. So if you want to hook this up more as a computer rather than a NAS, keyboard and mouse, no problem. Or if you want to plug in a UPS, you plug it into one of those because it doesn't need a ton of data throughput. We have two 10 gigabit Ethernet ports. That's wild. I advocate for a minimum of one. Two is crazy and over the top. You can do a lot of different stuff with that. You can aggregate them. You can send them to different connections. Of course, AC power. No power brick for this because this is going to have a fairly high maximum power draw. We have an HDMI port and a display port. That is HDMI 2.1 and DisplayPort 1.4a. Still very impressive specs. On the inside, if we open this thing up, we have an Intel Core i5 1240p. It's a 12-core, 16-thread processor, TDP of 28 watts. But this is going to try to run at lower wattages because this is a tight package, and once you get all the hard drives in, there's not a lot of room for a CPU cooler right down at the bottom there. All right, let's flip this thing around. Oh boy. Have a look at the bottom here. I already have it opened up. We have our two M.2 slots. They're both populated here. And we have two RAM slots. It comes with one stick of RAM already, and that is 32 gigabytes. But you can upgrade this to 96, which is crazy, 52 megahertz RAM. And inside there is another M.2 slot that is exclusively for the operating system at 128 gigabytes. And around to the front, the real business end. This is where we have our hard drive bays. As you can see, there are 10 of them, so you can fill this with a ridiculous amount of storage. So this will support RAID 0, RAID 1, 5, 6, 10, 50, and 60. For the basics, most people start with a RAID 1 because they're just pairing up drives. And then once you get more drives, move into a 5 or 6 so that you have better performance, better data management, more reliable data. And this runs by default on the ZFS file system, which is incredibly solid and robust, very much a commercial grade thing. On the inside here, you have all those bays, and then on the bottom you have your processor and mainboard and so forth. And also, on the back, because this is USB 4, this supports external GPU enclosures. As I mentioned, this is an AI device, and some people say, well, these NAS enclosures, they don't have massive GPUs, and that's what AI often uses for acceleration, for pretty much everything. And if you want, you can slap an external GPU enclosure onto that to give you that maximum power. I'm not going to do that. That is beyond the scope of this. I'm going to look at this from my perspective as a photographer, videographer, creator who generates a ton of content and needs somewhere safe to put it. So moving on from that. So if we compare this to the overall lineup of all of the more powerful desktop NASs available, you will see that currently this is sitting at the top of the market. The two NASs that are more powerful than this are ones that are coming out soon but not yet, the Ugreen IDX 6011 and 6011 Pro. But right now, this is the top, the most powerful, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into software and how well that software works. But if we're just looking at the spec sheet, which is what this category is about, feature set, the only thing that I would want would be more M.2 slots. They have a whole product lineup here, but there's another one step below this that has 5 hard drive bays, but 6 M.2 bays. I would rather have more M.2 storage as someone who has to use a lot of fast storage, things in and out very quickly. Love that. So I would rather have a little bit more solid state storage going on here. And I would rather these caddies be toolless. You do have to crack out a screwdriver to get these to work. And the same for the M.2 slots. You have to screw them in. I want toolless all around. So the only thing that we're missing for features, very nitpicky stuff, 9.75 out of 10 for feature set. This is just crazy, the amount of stuff they squeezed into this. Nothing compares at present. Next up is build quality. We have a massive, thick metal shell around the sides. Again, it is seriously a vault. And then once you unscrew a few screws, you can slide the whole thing off, and then you can see the chassis on the inside. And even the internal chassis is very rigid and rugged. On the front here, we have the front fascia that attaches magnetically. I'm not a huge fan of how we're covering up all our airflow here. And more to that, we have 2 fans in the back. But as you can see, the fans are very covered by this decorative plate. And honestly, if I'm looking at using this long term, I would seriously consider just myself dremeling these face plates open and putting just a normal fan grill on top of it to greatly increase that airflow. Because airflow is a bit of an issue here, because there is so much power in here. If you are doing a huge job that takes a ton of power, this thing does bog down thermally a little bit. That speaks into our software section, but also the build quality. This particular model is just completely over the top, and they are still in software tweaking fan curves and heat management and all that stuff. So what I'm looking at right here is still a little bit preliminary, and they are aggressively updating. We'll talk about that more later. And then one issue that I have with the build as well, down at the bottom here, we have, again, where our M.2 slots and RAM sit, but there is this little tiny tab here that means that if I have additional RAM or additional M.2 drives in here, it will bump into them. I have to take them out to open this chassis. I'm not a big fan of that. But take a look at this door. This thing is intense. That is wild how thick the metal is on this. And one issue that I had with this was with the fans in the back. I don't know if they were rattling or if there was a wire moving around in there, but it started to develop a tick over time. And eventually I opened it up, reseated that wire, put a little foam around the corners of the fans, and now it's much quieter. Overall though, it is not the quietest NAS on earth, nor is it the loudest. It comes in at about 40, 41 decibels when it's not doing a whole lot. One issue that I have with it is that the sleep mode doesn't work fantastically. You can manually put it into hibernation, but those fans are just always going. You can shut down the hard drives, but the fans are just always running. I don't really like that too much. Hoping for more software updates for that. And another issue with those M.2 slots in the bottom here is that they're not really a part of the overall airflow of this chassis. So you're gonna wanna make sure they have heat sinks on them so that they don't overheat, and really only use PCI 4, possibly even Gen 3. Don't use 5. You can't use 5. There's no benefit to it in something like this, and those just generate extra heat. But for the most part, most of my issues with this are very nitpicky, and overall, compared to the rest of the traditional NAS market, this thing is so overconstructed, it's insane. It's crushing my fingers. This thing is an absolute unit. A quick note about the hardware, some recent upgrades announced by Orico. They are upgrading the fans both on the back and on the CPU, which is great to see. And they say that they're adding some cooling channels for the NVMe as well as including heat sinks. That is fantastic. And so this should be able to handle those thermals a little bit better than the version that I have. And maybe I need to do a little DIY upgrading myself to get myself to that place. So build quality, I do have to give this a 9 out of 10. It is incredibly well constructed with very nice materials. I just question a few of the design choices. Next up is OS and software. And this is where we run into some trouble. As we would expect, Orico has made a lot of NASs in the past, but this is their new push into like a much higher end, more aggressive, more professional, more powerful set of devices. And so we have a new operating system, and it's missing a lot. We have a lot of things that are still written in Chinese characters that haven't translated yet. When I first got this going, I couldn't connect over SMB, and it turned out that was because there was a capital letter in my username for SMB, and then they released an update for that. Speaking of which, as I mentioned before, they have been aggressively updating this like crazy. Reminds me a lot of the early days with the Ugreen NASs, and that's promising. They've been killing, squashing bugs like crazy so fast. And because of that, there is promise, at the very least. It has been incredibly stable, I will grant them that, and there are some big pluses that I haven't seen with any of the other NAS manufacturers. One is once you map your hard drives, it is done in no time, incredibly fast. It doesn't do like the full write of the entire volume. It just sets up the registry, and it's done. In addition to that, starting, booting, restarting, shutting down, wildly fast, like 10 times faster than any other NAS that I have. And adding to that, when you install a firmware update, it is done in seconds, usually far less than a minute. They seem to be using Delta updates of some kind, which again is very surprising, unprecedented. You install the update, most of the time it doesn't even shut down, it's just done. Software update's complete. However, all that very promising stuff aside, we're still waiting for a lot of different apps on this. This doesn't have nearly the amount of first-party apps as most of the larger incumbents like Synology and QNAP, and not even as much as Ugreen. But we do have Docker support, and it's working perfectly right out the gate. That's fantastic. We are supporting third-party operating systems, so if you don't like Orico's offering, you can install TrueNAS or HexOS or something like that. That's no big deal. And maybe someday come back to Orico's stock system. I'm staying on stock for now because I don't like to overcomplicate things for the most part. I'm just doing file storage and photo sorting. And unfortunately there is where we're having some problems. I've done tests in the past comparing other systems against each other to see who has the most accurate facial recognition. And when I dump my massive nearly 300,000 photo collection into this, it unfortunately had a rough time. I can't narrow down which faces are considered significant. So in a lot of other ones, you have to have like a minimum number of appearances in your photos before they'll appear. And they just appear in like random order. This person has 2 photos of them, and this person that has 4,000, oh, they're further down here. So number 1, the sorting is terrible. Number 2, the facial recognition is still well below that of other systems like Apple Photos, Google Photos, even Ugreen's system and TerraMaster systems. Just not as accurate, breaks the faces into multiple pieces, and because I have so many photos though, so many people were found that I could not run my full analytic on this to do a direct comparison because there were just too many. Thousands and thousands of faces, and I just couldn't get it to sort. So hopefully they can fix that very soon. Again, they're aggressively updating software. The other side of the software is this is specifically designed to run AI models. So that's great that you can upgrade the RAM to 96 gigabytes. If you're running AI models, you're going to need that. It's great that you can put an external GPU on this because, again, if you're running AI models, you're going to want to be able to do that. And you have access to a tremendous amount of storage on that thing. And again, if you're going to run AI models, you're going to want to be able to do that. One interesting thing that it does is that when you start it up, it kind of explicitly recommends against using SSD caching. Not sure why. I like to have that. That's why I like to have 4 M.2 slots, 2 for SSD caching, and 2 for my hot storage, my very fast access storage. So I didn't use SSD caching as this recommended. And when I'm doing massive transfers, it obviously bogs down a little bit. On other NASs, if you use a large amount of SSD caching, that doesn't happen. With this one, let's say I'm backing up a Final Cut library, talking 100, 200, 400 gigabytes of data, it will slow down quite a bit because there's nowhere to cache that. You run out of RAM and it's driving into those hard drives as fast as possible, but you're not going to be saturating your 10 gig connection. We'll talk more about that in our network performance. There's some interesting things going on there. And also, likewise, when it was scanning my photos for facial recognition, object recognition, scene recognition, blah, 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 it had a lot of slowdown because, again, we have a crazy powerful processor here. And so I manually set the fans to maximum. That helped quite a bit. I don't think it expected me to throw such a ridiculously large work set at it. It's designed for AI, and that processor is wicked fast in bursts. And I mean, a lot of AI querying is just a burst of some kind, but when I had this thing churning for hours on the facial recognition, I was not happy about that. Now, I did not do a lot of testing of integrated AI models because that's not my bag, but I do one day, and maybe I'll return to this at a later date, want to have my own LLM on site because me as a person, I'm big on security and I'm not big on feeding my data to some computer in the cloud. I do want to have that on site in my home network. I've got a super fast home network. It's a 10 gig network, fast Wi-Fi, all that stuff. And I wanted to be able to enable that myself and control that myself. And so I am very excited that for some reason, the market is headed towards private AI. Some people dump on that idea. They say, you know, the cloud ones are always going to be better. I don't care. I am getting really tired of AI companies eating my data, my photos, my videos for their profit with no compensation. I want to be able to control all this myself and feed my own data in and control what is analyzed and how it is used. Overall, for software, we are obviously still not there. If we look at our apps, those are surprisingly functional, stable, complete. Speaking of stable, again, this has been incredibly stable. So although we were missing features and there are some rough edges, I am happy to say that the stability has been rock solid. I've had this running for weeks now. So overall, our software, on the software side, 6.5 out of 10. Easily our weakest link, and that was to be expected. Networking performance. This is to be unexpected. When I am testing networking performance on my Mac, I have a 10 gig Ethernet adapter running through Thunderbolt. The most I can pretty much ever get out of that is about a 5 gig situation, and that holds true on this end as well. The most I can get throughput on my machine, again, it's a macOS thing, it's an adapter thing, it's kind of limited. But, and this harkens back to the software, somewhere where I was truly impressed was I could add the Ugreen DXP 4800 Plus into this as a network site, and it was wildly stable. And this was way back on like the first versions of the firmware software on this. I went in, I found the Ugreen no problem in this thing's software, added its folders, and it has maintained rock solid a connection to my other NAS, which was something that the Ugreen wasn't good at doing itself, and most other NASs aren't. They do not like talking to other brands, and a lot of the time they have trouble talking to their own brand of NASs. This one found it, connected, and in that connection, it achieved a full 10 gig throughput because very little overhead. These Ethernet ports are like baked into the boards, into the system. There's no back and forth happening here. Ethernet out, into the 10 gig switch, into the other NAS, boom, incredibly fast performance. And again, that was with the earliest version of the software. I wasn't expecting it to perform that well right out the gate. And we have two 10 gig ports. I have no way to saturate two 10 gig ports. I could aggregate them together, but I only have one 10 gig adapter, and even if I added two, macOS would have a heart attack because it doesn't like networking that fast. In macOS, if you turn on jumbo frames, in case you weren't aware, it creates just a whole host of problems and network failures, and it will work for sending something to and from your NAS, but everything else in your life will break. And that's the only way to get full 10 gig performance in macOS, so unfortunately, I am limited in that way. So for networking performance, this is an easy 10 out of 10, and it kind of makes everyone else look pathetic. All those single 10 gig ports devices out there, what were you even thinking? You're useless. I don't even know what I'm gonna do with the second port, but anyway. Value, this one is incredibly tricky because we have a launch price. It's kind of a Kickstarter price. and that was about 900 US dollars. There is a final MSRP, about 1700 US dollars. Let's see how that compares. The closest thing currently in the market right now would be the Ugreen DXP 8800 Plus. Here we have 8 drive bays, not 10. 2 M.2 slots, pretty much the same. Slightly less performance, less features on all counts, just slightly, for $1,500. So it costs a little bit less, and you get a little bit less. That's pretty even Steven in my books. Oh, another thing that I like, lots of LEDs in the front. Some new devices are starting to remove individual LEDs for things. Stop doing that, I want my information. Okay, price. More directly competing with this will be the new Ugreen IDX series. That is going to be crazy powerful, but those will only have 6 hard drive bays, so it doesn't compete directly, but you have a more powerful processor. But how well will that processor's heat be managed? Because again, it's going to be in a tight enclosure, so we'll see how that happens. I think Ugreen's going to be sending me one for review soon enough. Then we'll compare these head to head. It's going to be intense. I'm not sure if my power bill is going to like that. They're still in the pre-order stage. Now, if we go with like traditional NAS manufacturers, we would be looking at the Synology DS3622XS Plus and the DS1823XS Plus, which sell for $3,200 and $1,900 respectively. Hardware-wise, this thing demolishes both of them. Like, it's not even close. If we go back to our performance scale here, we're looking at a multi-core of 7592 on the most expensive one there, and this one is over twice that performance. It's completely ridiculous. And this has been a story for a long time. Synology, you're paying for the software experience, you're paying for the support, you're paying extra for hard drives that have been validated by them for no apparent reason. But anyway, if that's worth it to you, then sure. But on the value, bang for your buck scale, especially since you could install a third-party OS on this if you so choose, if there's one that you love, this thing, the value is way ahead. Because this does compete fairly directly with the 8800 Plus, so again, the 8800 Plus, you get a little less performance for a little less money, I'm still going to give this a 9.5 out of 10 for value. It might seem expensive. 1,700 bucks is a whole computer, but this is a whole computer. The I/O, the massive amount of storage, the crazy fast processor, expandability. It's a computer. It's a server for $1,700. And that gives us a total score of 89.5%, and that is a very high score. Which leads me to ask you a question. Because of the way my scoring systems are typically arranged, should I be putting more weight on the software side? Because everything this just absolutely excelled at, except for software, because it's newer. They're still building it, aggressively updating it, adding new features constantly. But software is a very large part of your experience, so should I be weighting that heavier? But at the same time, conversely, I can see why I wouldn't necessarily want to, because you could install whatever software you want on that, in which case the entire software category ceases to be worth anything at all. I'm not sure which way I want to go on that, so as of right now, I think I'm kind of happy with that. Orico created something that is incredibly ambitious and aggressive to put out into the marketplace, but they're still working on it, still ironing out some of the bugs. Thankfully though, the bugs aren't making this unstable. That ZFS file system is rock solid, and I'm happy and I am excited to see where they take this. And hopefully someday we'll come back for a retrospective on this when things seem to be a little more fully baked. If you want to pick one up, again, there's going to be a link down in the description. I don't know if it'll be affiliate in any way. Ugh. Time to get a workout and go take some photos.